Welcome to week 3 of INET3011W, the social impact of IT. This week's topic is development methodologies, and this is not specifically around development itself, but really how do we develop. It's never done as an individual anymore, and we need to figure out how we play a part in all of it. And with the advent of many new technologies coming out, it's much larger than building a piece of software in C and deploying it on medium. It's a much vaster landscape of things that are out there. So we're going to talk about some techniques and kind of introduce some topics that'll be covered quite a bit through the rest of this semester. Around the difference between agile methodologies and waterfall methodologies. How do we measure productivity? We used to look at value on things like that as lines of code, which is kind of almost ridiculous because the more lines of code you have doesn't mean it's better software. It just means that you wrote a lot. And then kind of how do we really envelop all of this into something that we can sell and deliver to our customers? So again, these versions of kind of agile versus waterfall are very common, and what is spoken about all over the place, and how to actually do software development. The funny thing is that agile is something that we're now seeing in different parts of different forms of IT. So it's not just a development thing. It's really a methodology, and how do you get something out there? And my interpretation or my version of it is really that waterfall is great if you know exactly what you want, exactly for how much, what it's going to look like, all the deliverables, all the key pieces to make sure that it comes out. Which sometimes we don't exactly know that. Sometimes we know we want to achieve something in a certain direction. But we want to take small iterative steps and kind of look at it along the way and say, okay, is this kind of what we're going after, and kind of getting feedback. So this agile methodology was actually derived out of what was called Lean, which started actually at Toyota. So the base fact of agile is really around the fact that you pretty much know what you want, but you don't want to guess at it and be wrong. And sometimes it's not even worth doing it that way. Sometimes it's better just to, kind of take it as you go. And, if you have a overarching goal that you want to, figure out how to, build a website that'll take in, charitable donations as an example, you know what you want to do. You got to go talk to some people about, the components and pieces and parts. And you really don't know how the end users will actually use it. So, much like Apple would do, or other product manufacturers, sometimes it's better just to get a prototype out there very quickly, put it in their hands and say, what do you think? I don't like it. Okay, why don't you like it? Well, I don't like it because it doesn't have these features, and this is a little hard to understand. And then they work on it, and they just keep going through and testing. And so it is a cycle in a way of doing that. So it gives you kind of that, almost instantaneous, or it's usually 2 weeks is what they call sprint, 2 weeks to a month cycles of feedback, which helps you think about it going down the road. Now, a lot of people think that waterfall is old and bad and agile is the way to go. I don't believe that. I think there's certain things that are always going to be in a waterfall methodology. Usually forms of services that we perform in IT, usually around professional services. I'll go install this system and get it up and running for X amount of dollars, and it'll be done by this. Here's my deliverable, my statement of work. It's all defined, and that's fine. Software development usually kind of trends to be more agile based, because a lot of times we know that we want to get something out there. And if you went and looked at the history of, even the iPhone, was it Magic Rabbit or whatever the company was that kind of started it. It was interesting to see that, the prototypes and all the things that they had, back, what was it, 20 years ago or whatever it is, and how they were kind of doing this even back then, and how that's kind of, adopted to now. But it's still always that, get it in somebody's hands, have them test it, use it, and then, make it good before it comes out. Don't just kind of guess at it and then just keep updating. DevOps is a relatively newer term. I would say that I think it was coined in 2008, so not really that old. And it's a funny one because it's one of those that, by definition, it doesn't have a definition. So what is DevOps? Well, it's kind of a culture. It's a way to do things. It's not necessarily a perfectly defined thing. The base fact is DevOps is obviously putting development with operations and really doing some cool things around automation, being able to do things, at the click of a mouse button instead of somebody spending months and months and months building something by hand. It's got a real base concept in what's called CI/CD, so continuous improvement, continuous development. So again, Agile and DevOps kind of go together. But DevOps is kind of this new mode of how we deliver, and you'll hear a lot about people talking about, SDN, SD-WAN, SD-LAN, SD this, SD that, so software defined. And software defined really means that, now with cloud resources and some other things, we don't need the hardware side of it. We don't need to figure that out. We can just leverage all these things that are out there, and they have APIs, so we can just stitch them all together and make them work. It's obviously way more complicated than that, but that's kind of the idea behind DevOps and what we're doing there. Development processes come and go. Again, if you're following an agile methodology, the process pretty much is somewhat defined in how you do that. And then what you want to do is you want to get it down to something that, somebody has ownership. It's clearly defined. They know exactly what they need to get done. Documentation is all ready, and away you go. I think that's been the reason why offshoring hasn't worked, is people don't put that rigor in, and they get to a point where it isn't doing what it's supposed to be doing, or I assume that this is what you wanted, so I built it that way, and that's usually always fraught with failure in the end. Microservices and containers are a newer thing as well. This is our idea that we created virtualization decades ago at IBM, and that was, the ability to cut up a mainframe and give different operating systems to run inside of it. If you've done anything with VMware or Parallels or any of the other tools out there like that, you know what that does. Microservices and containers is a way to kind of say, well, we don't really need another full running operating system. We just want our own environment to go run in. So these are, Docker is the kind of poster child for all of this. Kubernetes is the latest that everybody's jumping to and understanding. But it's much more than just a different way to code or a different way to plug in software. It's radically different in how we think about everything from packaging, deployment, what does it mean to upgrade, and to me, it's really about the strength of a solution when you sell it that way. Because if something isn't working, you fix the microservice. You don't have to, fix an entire operating system, an entire full database. You just, you modify the one at hand. And so a lot that goes into that. Serverless computing kind of gets into that as well. Amazon has their Lambda, and that's what, the first thing everybody runs to is, I'm going to put all my code in Lambda, and I don't need necessarily a full operating system to go run it. Now, it's not magic. There's obviously an operating system behind it, but it's just kind of abstracted away, and nobody needs to know or care. It just runs, and when it does what it does, great. And then tools, there's tons of them out there, but you have to understand which ones do what. So, Jira and AHA and some of those other things help a lot with documentation, and some of them actually measure things based on shirt sizes versus, hours of work and other funny things. So, and from Git and IDEs and all the others, there's a lot that goes into it. And we're seeing a trend of a lot less coding per se, and a lot more orchestration, a lot more automation, and a lot more, putting data into other systems. And then when you actually get to the coding, there isn't, necessarily a lot left to do. Productivity is an interesting one because, like I was saying earlier, it is kind of funny to think about the lines of code really made a difference to anybody. But, obviously if you've got 10 million lines of code and you've got this full running system, that's quite a bit you've put into it. But it's also interesting to think about, how open source and non-compiled languages like Python have kind of jumped in, because with Python I can read your code. I mean, I can see it. So all of that has kind of gone by the wayside. But we do want to make sure that we are getting things done, as efficiently as possible. And notice I didn't say as cheaply as possible, because sometimes going too cheap is suffering quality. But as we kind of look at, again, back to Agile does a lot of this for us. And it does have a lot of these things that they've kind of built through. And it used to be that, we would do releases of software based on the trending of bugs. So if we were trending down in bugs at a certain point, that would now become beta software. And then when it got even better, then it would become generally available. So different ways to look at it. But there's also the difference between, what we would get somebody to say about us, which is a NPS, a net promoter score, very commonly used term in the industry. And it's pretty simple. It's one question. Given anything, whether it's, Apple or your software or anything, would you recommend this thing to a friend or a colleague? And you kind of rank it out of 1 to 10, and it's an interesting math equation, because it's I think it's like 8, 9, and 10, or maybe just 9 and 10 are positive. I think 1, 2, 3, and 4 I think are negative, and they actually knock each other out. So if you have more negative than positive, you actually have a negative value. So you can have an NPS score of -10, which is obviously not good. Or when you start to look at industry trends, getting up to 50 or 60 is tremendous. Company I work for is at 72, which is out of the ballpark. And it's just a measure to say, are they delivering on their promises? Are you, satisfied with what they're doing for you, to the point that you'd recommend it to somebody else? We can also look at the internal. So, as an example, you could have an employee, engagement score, or, something like net promoter score, but an employee promoter, to ask, would you recommend a colleague or friend to work here? Different question, obviously different results and different ways to look at it. Some of these I think are interesting in our industry. But I think they also don't give you enough information. So if your NPS score is bad, what do you do about it? And how do you know that what you did affected it going up or down? So many other things that come with that, but just different ways to think about it. And then this whole product development lifecycle, it's not just the team of developers, and it's not just a project manager running them. It's a product manager who is living and breathing everything about that every day. They're understanding what the competitors do, understand pricing, understand what's expected out of it. Usually from a shareholder perspective, you've got, what kind of revenue and profit am I going to get from this? How is this going to change my company? Then you get into the planning process, and then you start to think about, okay, well, how are we going to bring this thing to market? And then you get marketing involved, and you got to get salespeople involved, and then you got to have channels. And so there's a lot of pieces that go into this. It's not as simple as just saying, oh, I got this great idea and I built this product and now we're good to go. And then, it's usually at some point, the piece that usually gets skipped over, especially in entrepreneurial startup companies, is, this idea of quality. And so whether it's testing or, bringing things through a cycle, it seems like, well, we don't really need that, or we tested a little bit and it was good. There's a certain amount of, again, emphasis you want to put on making sure that you're getting the right testing and documentation and getting the kinks out before you get it out in front of your customers, because the last thing you want is your customers being your testers without them knowing it. So this week is a discussion basically on development performance. So kind of talking about what I was just bringing up, what would make sense to you. And then our first short writing assignment. So this is in Canvas, so follow along in there of what to do, but it's really structuring and getting ready for paper number 1. So this is a scaffolding event. So this is kind of going through and building through some of the ideas. And so what we want to do in this whole writing world of 3011W is to start to write things and then go back and revise and think. And it's a very good practice to do. I do it with every email I send out, every document I create. You go away, you come back, and then you reread it, and you try to get to, is this the point I was really trying to make? Does this mean anything? Is this impactful? Did I say too much? It's usually the problem. So this one's really just starting that process. So go ahead and follow that through, and we'll talk to you next week.